welcome to E-Bomb's World. Yeah, I wanted to bring up Howard Schultz. he is, for clarification, he's a walking contradiction, and he's the goddamn devil. He's not a good person, no matter how much nice of an image he puts off, or how misunderstood he is. I feel like he educates himself, but on the wrong as fuck things. Yeah, that's really all I gotta say. He's the reason tens of thousands of people die of preventable things every day, like hunger. And that's never okay. He should be totally taken down. He should be forcefully, liquidated. And to say that we can't afford Medicare for all or shit like that, I don't even fucking call it Medicare for all. To say we can't have like a universal health care, we can't afford it, is fucking bullshit. And he does these gymnastics to say that it's not feasible or whatever, but he's wrong. We're the richest country on earth, and much less well-off countries get that done, easily. By the way, very easily. And people love the policy. Yeah, that's all I gotta say. Today I'm going to talk about the environment. Lots of people don't take that seriously. Lots of leftists don't really take it as seriously as they should. Not really. I can't even really think of who, but it's a passive thing. People just don't talk about it enough, it seems like. So, how does capitalism impact our environment? Basically, it sets a bunch of limits on it. It sets a shit ton of limits on it. And it's because of the nature of our mode of production, obviously. We don't have an economy based on use. We have an economy based on exchange. And when you have an economy based on exchange and profit, things like that, individual success and whatnot, you're not going to focus on social issues because that's not going to make you more money. So yeah, that's a huge thing. Capitalism's main, article or argument or whatever, maybe not the main article, but a lot of the main arguments include people being self-employed in the sense that they can individually own what people use to produce commodities. So they extract a certain amount of money from workers' production, like I've said before, and the surplus value of that production is used as their pay. And capitalists will use strategies to ensure that they make the most money possible, whether that be through innovation or further extraction of surplus value via lowering wages. Capitalism requires a constant growth. Not everyone knows this. A lot of this could just be because those in control want a consistent increase in pay. Capitalists need what is growth in general, but they prefer a certain amount of money to stay on a certain pace with other corporations. And when this amount of growth isn't achieved, they'll do some pretty wicked things to, fuck other people over, and just make themselves, still rich. So yeah, like for instance, GM laid off a few thousand workers, like earlier this year, or like the end of last year or some shit. The CEOs have consistently had some crazy increase in pay over the last 40 years as a result of workers' wages stagnating. Instead of stagnating their already, hulking salaries. They've brought the neoliberal policy of tax cuts and imperialist colonialist policy. They haven't just brought it in. We've already been an imperial place for a long ass time, since the beginning. Let's be real. I don't know if I can say it's gotten worse or whatever, but it's more or less continued. The point is, the room for growth is running out, and the capitalists are scrambling for resources. How does capitalism's contradictions create an ecosystem and productive relations that reach their outer limits? Jonathan Friedman, in his work Tribes, States, and Transformations, he maps out a, quote, model of social reproduction. This model shows an ecosystem highlighted as the outer border of three subsystems. And these subsystems consist of productive forces, and then relations of production below that, and then there's the superstructure at the bottom. And they're all impacted by the outer system, originally and subsequently. The ecosystem is also impacted by those subsystems. So a special sort of cycle is formed out of this. The ecosystem sets limits for the productive forces, which then sets limits on relations of production, which then sets limits for the superstructures, which will in turn limit the ecosystem. During the Industrial Revolution, shortly after the feudal era of production, people took the route of capital and formed capitalist relations due to the assumption there was not enough food being produced. There's all this, stuff being invented. With the industrialization, though, abundance became more and more common. We, developed a culture of want instead of need, and I can get into that a little bit later on, if I want to. But yeah, today we have recessions due to overproduction, which is completely contradictory. We have an economy because we need to distribute resources, as a result of scarcity. And when you're within a society of want instead of need, that really kind of screws over that whole idea of scarcity. But yeah, as a result of increasing production and political power, the capitalist powers have grown beyond national borders and into other countries and continents. And this is something that Lenin predicted. The mode of production impacted our social relations, which then resulted in our concrete superstructures, which is institutions, stuff like that, policies, which then went back to transform the outer border, the ecosystem, via carbon emissions, which has already created limitations for future productive forces. This could have the dire impact of never being able to realize feeding everybody, even though we can right now. And the UN and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said that Earth's ecosystems only have 12 years before they're at high risk. Quote, urgent changes are needed to cut risk of extreme heat, droughts, floods, and poverty. This work by Jonathan A. Foley, published in Science magazine. This work is called Global Consequences of Land Use. He talks about farming practices and how soil erosion is causing a major meltdown for people, predicting whether we can feed the world in 2050. We're on a course of failure for now, but nobody in the corporate world seems to address this. It's in their interest to not address it, in a serious manner. Sorry to anybody that thinks a claim of overpopulation or lack of resources is a call for genocide or eugenics. It doesn't have to be. It's the overpopulation thing may not be the right word. It's really just, depleting of resources. We might actually not have enough resources sooner or later if we just don't do anything. The farming industry hasn't performed the right variety of soil maintenance to upkeep it, and by 1991, according to Jerry Glover and Linda, I think it's pronounced Q, of National Geographic, we lost the size of the United States and Canada to oil erosion. To restore the United States soil to where it was before Columbus came, it would take about, quote, 200 years. This means even more people would starve as a result of capitalism and imperialism, which is worse. Leaving people to starve as a result of dying, trying to feed everybody, or leaving them to starve because CEOs, couldn't, get a big enough hit. While capitalists will say we cannot have a socialist economy because there's scarcity and everybody will go hungry, it is really capitalism that can lead to a lack of potential for socialism. Though in the industrial age, it actually makes for a greater potential for a socialist society to thrive, as industrialization of a country does in earlier phases create mass abundance and even overproduction, as we see today. It is fair to say capitalism is antagonistic. It brings unjust worker pay. It's given those from the feudal era a complete head start. Investment is good. It's just the money is in the wrong place. So yeah, we're in big trouble, in terms of the environment. And I want to move on to the whole thing I was talking about with the society of want instead of need. So, capitalism isn't just fundamentally inefficient and bad for workers' well-being. There are symptoms of it that cause major problems. Our society has evolved from one of regulatory consumption to one of obligatory enjoyment. In the article, quote, "Drug Addiction and Capitalism, Too Close to the Body," by sociologist Ole Bjerg, Bjerg sees our current capitalist world as a place that is practically dictated by consumption and not, want. Or need, my bad. Bjerg sees addiction as a consumption of a certain kind. Bjerg often cites the renowned philosopher and psychoanalyst Slavoj Žižek, who has given speeches at Cambridge, Oxford. He's written over 50 books. You may have heard of him. He's going to debate Jordan Peterson on capitalism. There's like a debate on Marxism and capitalism, capitalism versus Marxism. It'll be cool. That's in 4 days. Bjerg sees the realm of addiction as dominated by neurobiology and believes it could use some philosophical input. Quote, "The aim is to unfold the potential of this particular theoretical approach for understanding drug use and drug addiction, rather than to provide a broad spectrum discussion of the topic. What is missed by using this theoretically narrow approach are, of course, the nuances between different forms of drugs, different kinds of addiction, and all the socioeconomic factors surrounding the issue of drugs and addiction." End quote. The two do not believe that consumption as opposed to production has always been the main direction of Western private enterprise. They believe it was transformed into what we have now because of over-commercialization of commodities. Commercials, to Bjerg and Žižek, can make a commodity with no use value into a commodity that is, based on a surplus of enjoyment or over a standard satisfaction. Žižek uses Coca-Cola as the prime example of a commodity exhibiting these traits. It does not quench thirst like water, beer, or other beverages, but it produces a kick of energy. To him, it isn't surprising that Coca-Cola was first introduced to the market as a medicine. It brings a feeling that many of us are conditioned to maximize. And that brings us to the comparison between capitalism and hard drugs. Commodities with little to no use value, such as Coca-Cola, and hard drugs, such as heroin and cocaine, contain all reward resulting from new effort set of effects. Bjerg even says that we've gotten to the point where enjoyment and happiness are not depicted as things that are meant to be regulated, but rather things that can be synthesized and used to any extent. The end goal is to feel happier than ever before or even completely happy. This doesn't have to be a can of Coke. It can be the website you go to, the club you go to, your lover, television, or even politics, depending on your motives. They may not give off the image of a problem to many people because they're socially accepted activities, but these interactions can surely be overused for excessive pleasure. And this is a quote from Žižek. Quote, "The distinction between duty and enjoyment has collapsed and may even be accompanied by guilt. In a, quote, permissive society, subjects feel the need to have a good time as a kind of duty. And they feel guilty if they fail to be happy." Quote, "There is no such thing as a sexual relationship." That's a great explanation as to how hard drug use and common habits that are overly advertised both accomplish the same goal when used in excess. The reason they say that no relationship is purely sexual is because a purely sexual relationship ends quickly. Sex alone cannot give anybody a sense of completeness, and it doesn't lead to a fulfilled life. Happiness is a byproduct. It's not some sort of feat to achieve and stay at. It's not something that can be permanent. It's not that you're never supposed to enjoy things or that the things I listed are not supposed to be enjoyable. It's just that most of the time when we indulge, these things do not provide what their profiteers promise. No individual can simply fill the, quote, void. It's probably not far off to say that the void is a constellation of expectations for happiness, in part created by mass media. Once we break away from the notion that commodities can bring self-actualization, we can begin to think in a more logical sense. So I think this is all I got to talk about for today. Howard Schultz, the environment, addiction in relation to capitalism. I don't really know what I'm going to talk about next. Human nature seems like a good one to talk about sometime soon. Until then, this is E-Bomb's World. Have a good one, y'all.